that we share you the recording, and all of the slides will be shared at the end of the day. So I'll get the recording and I'll get the slides and I'll put them in that same folder. I'll show you where they'll be at the end of today. So this is being recorded so people can come back and have a look, or you could introduce staff to little elements of it if you want down the track. So what is this showcase? What is this Microsoft School Transformation Program? It's really an engagement with Microsoft that we built because we know that having individual teachers involved in getting excited about the use of technology and trying to implement in that school is hard if you don't have the support of different members of your school community. And so that includes leaders, which is you guys. It also includes teachers and teaching staff. It also includes IT. And so then it's about creating some sort of a vision across your school of what does technology look like in our school to enable great learning for kids and great teaching for teachers? And what are some of the elements that we might need to talk about? And so the first part of this school transformation program is what we're doing today, which is the leaders workshop. And your teachers will be signed up to do other workshops, and I'll go through what they're sort of covering. But this is just to give you a bit of an idea of what your school will cover. And my strong recommendation is that once all the workshops have been done, you pull that whole group back together who went to all of these workshops and continue to work on the vision that we'll start this afternoon. What are we actually going to do? What are we going to use? What's our PD approach? How are we going to share this vision across our school and our school community? All of those things are important. And today what we're going to do is I'm going to introduce you to something called the Education Transformation Framework. And so it is a framework which is created, I'm just going to mute everyone, a framework that is created by Microsoft, but it's also created in conjunction with 70 global leaders from around the world. UNESCO, OECD were involved, as well as professors of education and so on and so forth. And I'll explain that a little more, but that's our leadership day today. Your teachers will have signed up for an MAE Trainer Academy, or in some states we might be calling it an e-learning leaders academy. And basically what that is a deep dive with teachers, hands-on with the technology. What does this do? What does this mean for pedagogy? How might we be able to integrate it into our classrooms, regardless of what year level they're teaching in? And so it's a deep dive, hands-on stuff. We'll just scratch the surface of a few of these to give you the ideas of what we're talking about, but they'll be doing a deep dive, the teachers will, which may be some of you guys as well. The third thing that you'll get access to is an inclusive classroom session. And at Microsoft, we're very passionate about the role that technology can play in supporting every learner to achieve their goals. We've got learners who are, the research shows in every year level, in every class, there's usually a 4-year disparity between the lowest kid in terms of, say, reading, for example, and the highest kid. And so how can we use technology to help those students who might be struggling for whatever reason, whether it's through something like dyslexia, or whether it's just they're a more emerging reader than others? How can we sort of help them to get their skills up, and how can technology help that? So Troy, who's on the call, is our accessibility lead for education for Australia, and he's running inclusive classroom workshops, and some of the other LDSs, learning delivery specialists, are running those too. So that's a day where there might be teachers there might be support staff there from your school learning about the assistive technologies that we have in what you've got, this thing called Office 365. And the last one is IT pros. And so depending on which state you're in and which jurisdiction you're in, because some of you are independent schools, some of you are in departments of education, this will be tailored for your needs. And what I mean by that is, in some schools, the Department of Education manages your whole environment, really, and so there's lots of things you don't have to worry about because they take care of it. If you're in a independent school, then you might have your own environment, and therefore the IT pros need to have a different discussion. So we'll be tailoring that and customizing that as we go for each of those different groups of leaders. So that's the program. Leaders, teachers, support staff, and IT will all get some professional development through this program. Today, and I'll show you the agenda in a sec, what we want to do is I'm going to start really big, And then I'm going to go surprisingly low into the classroom. And I'm going to show you some stuff about classroom practice and setting stuff up. And you might be thinking, but I'm the principal, I don't need to worry about this. But we see time and time again that if you don't know what is possible in the classroom, it's very hard to set a vision for it. So you might be well down the track. You might have not even started your journey with using sort of Microsoft technology in your school or thinking about it. And so it's pretty hard to sort of cater for that. But we're going to start very broad, visionary, get down into the classroom, and then give you a block of time at the end of the day to make some sense of that and have some chats with others at your school and start creating that shared vision for learning around through the use of technology. Sorry about the time zone. If you're not on the East Coast, if you're not in Australian Eastern Daylight Time, Melbourne, Sydney time, these are Melbourne and Sydney times. So we're going to start now. We're going to do education insights for the next little while, another 45 minutes. Then we're going to start talking about what is this hybrid learning thing and how does technology enable engaging and active learning in the classroom and beyond the classroom. Heaven forbid we should go back into a lockdown situation. And then we're going to have a look at some science behind the cognitive science behind learning and the impact that certain types of technologies can have on that in the learning process. The last hour of today is really going to be over to you. I'll guide it with a series of activities, but it's where we'll use most of those things that we printed out, and to give you an hour to start thinking about what does all this mean? What do we need to focus on at our school? You certainly won't leave this workshop today with a fully complete, ready to go plan, because that doesn't happen in this short a time. But by the time you've done this as a starting point, you've seen the resources that we share. Then you have all your other attendees, so teachers and support staff and IT going to their sessions. You could pull that group back together as a little strategic planning committee and see what you need to do or what you want to do as a result of this. So that's the general plan for the day. So in an hour and 15 minutes, we'll be having a break, which for you could be breakfast, it could be morning tea, or it could be lunch, as it will be for me. And then we'll be finished by 2:30 in Melbourne, Sydney time, which is what 1:30 in Queensland, and so on and so forth. So it's only 3.5 hours that we've got together. So let me get started by starting with this education insights bit, this big picture stuff. And so people often say to us at Microsoft, you know, you've been doing educational technology for a long time, which we have. As a matter of fact, at Microsoft, it was the first vertical that we set up. So we now focus on, you know, mining and government and education and health, and education was the first one. We've been doing this for a long time, and people sort of said to us for a long time, oh, where's all your stuff? Where's all the knowledge? Where are you storing it all? And that's a pretty hard question because there's a lot of it. And so a couple of years ago, we put together this book, and I'll give you a link to it so you can download a PDF version of it. But it's called Transforming Education, and it's a distillation of lots of different things that are important in terms of us using technology to enhance the learning process, but also some other things. And you can see on this slide here, there are interviews and guides, including people in the bottom right-hand corner there, like Bruce Dixon, who was kind of the first person to be thinking about putting devices in the hands of kids in schools, which actually happened here in Australia in 1988. The first school actually put laptops in the hands of kids. You can imagine what they looked like back then and the functionality that they had, but fairly visionary sort of decision back in the day. There's policy guidance, there's mistakes you don't need to make, there's evidence and research, and there's stuff from architects who build building design and so on and so forth. So there's lots of different things in there. Here's a link to the book. It's a PDF version. Unfortunately, we don't have enough of the paper ones to go around. But one of the advantages of being a PDF version is that you can then grab screenshots of it and use it on slides or curate it as you see fit. So feel free to grab that link down and get a copy of that at some stage if you want to have a look at what's in it. It's a nice, easy read, and it gives you lots and lots of resources. So obviously we know that in schools there's so many different things you have to focus on, and technology is only one of them. And so we acknowledge the fact that while we're involved in technology and education, there are many other things that you need to focus on as leaders in your schools. We also know there's some real possibilities for transformation when we do sort of get into this idea of how technology can help, how learning spaces can help. There's lots of different work being done in these areas. You know, the middle one at the top there is interesting because 15 months ago, 12 months probably ago, most of us would have been going, yeah, education unlimited by time or place is not really something that is that important because my kids will always be at school. And from what we've learned and what we've seen, that's often not the case. More the case for us in Australia, but some countries. I was talking to a friend from the US this morning, and they're still in pretty severe lockdowns, and kids are still not quite back at school, and they're doing sort of different year levels coming back, and others still working at home. So they're having a lot of different conversations about unlimited by time and place. And we'll talk about some work being done by Michael Fullen and others in this area. And so one of the things as school leaders, as school leadership teams, is you have an awful lot of things on your plate, and technology might be one of them. And so it's really quite hard to get to a point where this can become a focus and will support exactly what you're wanting to achieve for teaching and learning in your classrooms. So in terms of technology specifically, we see these as some challenges for school leaders. You know, competing priorities, limited access to technology, or maybe access to professional learning. A lack of tech readiness at your school, which might be teachers, it could be in your IT faculties. There's lots of different challenges there. Lack of structure, you know, time to coach or to train or to support technology adoption when every classroom's full of 25 students who need to be taught that day. And parents might not be bought in on a vision is a real challenge, and insufficient resources to support that vision. So we may have lofty goals of what we want to achieve, but it might be quite difficult for us. So to get us started and to get the juices flowing, I'm going to do an activity with you. And it's an activity where you need the sticky notes that I said to bring along. So if you've got those sticky notes, grab them out now and grab a pen, because we're going to do a little activity here, which is about what are we doing well in our school at the moment around technology. So you could use little scraps of paper if you want, but I've asked you to print out a couple of those documents, and one of them has got the ETF sort of big hexagons on it. If you've printed it out, you'll know what I'm talking about. And we're going to stick these sticky notes on those hexagons later on. So that's why sticky notes are good, because they sort of stay in one place. If you've got multiple colors of sticky notes, just choose one color at the moment and stick with it. But the idea is that you're going to put one idea per sticky note. What is something you're doing well as a school around technology at the moment? It could be anything. It could be around the learning, it could be around the classroom setup, it could be around the technology that you've got inside the classrooms. It could be a great leadership team working on technology. It could be you've got a great STEM curriculum. You've got an amazing program in geography at year 7. Your year 3 curriculum's really rich. You've got great PD program. It doesn't really matter what it is. But I'm going to give you, let's say 4 minutes to write one idea per sticky note. So with that, I will turn my mic off and I will let you have 4 minutes to start thinking about one idea per sticky note. What are we doing well in technology? Clock starts now. Okay, time is up. Hopefully what you've got around you now are 5, 10, 15, 20 sticky notes, each of which has got one idea of something that's going really well in your school at the moment with technology. And no doubt there are lots of different things. We're going to do some sharing in a second, but just before we do, if you only have one color of sticky note today, we need to denote that these things are things that are going well. So put a little plus symbol in the top of your sticky notes. So a little positive symbol there so that when we do some opportunities for us to think differently later, so you can just pop a little plus in the top of your sticky note, each sticky note, so that you know if you've only got one color, how to differentiate those. If you've got two colors, you don't need to worry because you'll be able to see which ones are which later on. So what I want you to do now is we're going to do a little bit of sharing. So can you please open up a browser on your computer or your phone, and you're going to go to this link up here. So just go to a browser and go to polev.com/TravisSmith027. So polev.com/TravisSmith027. And what we're going to do is I'm going to get you to write your school name first. So you'll just have one block of text. So one place to type. So just put Fred Bloggs College, dash, and then one of the things your school is doing really well around technology now. So I'm going to put that up live because I love taking risks. So Chancellor State College, and then just put a dash and what is it? So Kingston Primary are saying they've got a great BYOD program. It's really good. So what is your school name, then dash. So you've got a professional learning MSTP. Don't know what that is. I assume that's from, so just you've only got one.
Microsoft School Transformation Program, I think, Trav.
Ah, that's what it is. Excellent. Yeah, okay, thank you, Chancellor. So curriculum expectations are being met. I like it. So Singleton High saying they've got great resourcing structure. Whittlesea Primary School, BYOD launched in 2021. So that's this year, that's very new. Effectively communicating via Teams, someone's doing accesses to devices that is consistent, nice, with touch and pen. Averley Secondary College, BYOD program. Brigidine, excellent laptop program. I think if that's Brigidine in Sydney, it's a very long-standing one too. Casula Primary School, dedicated technology team, excellent. St Anthony's got a great one-to-one iPad program. Seton College, great PD. Teams for phase of learning group stand-up meetings. Staff communication via com.box. Leadership support. Maitland, great community engagement through School Bag app and Facebook, nice. Year 7 laptop integrations happening. Merrymead, universal access to personal devices, nice. So everyone's got their device. Good BYOD uptake, BYOD trials, funding for professional learning. Trinity Christian School using Seesaw with the Lilies, that's good. Mobile devices, technology resources in every classroom at Alstonville High School. Good resourcing. So you might get cut off here because there's only sort of takes a certain number of responses, but it's great to see that there's lots and lots of innovation happening and there's lots of different things that are being valued within your schools around technology use. And some of those things around your BYOD programs or your provisioning and resourcing or your classroom setups or all those things are really, really positive and really useful. So we're going to look at some of the opportunities for us to get better in certain areas, reflecting on these really positive things later on. And one of the things that we're going to talk about later on is this idea of strategy. And strategy is really, really important if you want to look at where you are right now and where you want to head to in your journey around technology. And so it's going to involve us doing a couple of different things. Obviously, we're going to use what's called the education transformation framework that we are using, that we will go through in some detail to create some of that strategy. The other thing that we'll do is I am going to show you some examples of classroom practice and sort of some down in the classroom experiences to help you with a vision for what that might look like. I think it's important though to think about this idea down here, that no strategy can become a school strategy if you haven't thought about it. And I realize it's a confusing sentence, but we see it time and time again. And the way it often manifests itself is that at our school we do everything. And so what happens is that, often we focus on this for 2 weeks and then we do that and then we do this and we focus on that. And if you've got a group of e-learning champions as your teachers, which I've never seen a school that has everyone in that boat, they can do that. But the reality is in most schools, there are some teachers who really sort of battle away with technology and they use it for certain things, but they struggle to integrate it more deeply. And so not having a clear strategy and a consistent approach to technology really becomes very hard for those teachers. And we see that time and time again as we talk to thousands of schools around the country and the world in this space. So what is this education transformation framework? First thing I will say is that this might be the first time you've seen it, and it is for you probably a fairly arbitrary set of things. But where it comes from is a global piece of research that was done involving OECD, UNESCO, and lots of other educational experts globally. And we were looking at how can we help school systems or schools reflect on the things that we see work when they're really humming. So if a school system's going great, or if a school's going great, what are some of the things they get right? And you can imagine how many things there were, and being distilled down into these 4 broad categories was quite a bit of work to do. So I'm going to step through what these categories are, what these 4 different quadrants are, and kind of a little bit about what's underneath them. And later on, there will be some of these that you'll go, not relevant for me, we're doing that really well, we don't need to focus on it. But later on, we'll get you to sort of focus down to a point where you pick a couple of these things and go, hey, we really need to focus on that. And that's the second part of our sticky note activity. And it's also what we'll do in the last hour of the workshop today. So let's have a bit of a step through these things. You can see here, the first is the way they're structured is leadership and policy is the big idea. And then there's 4 different subparts under that: our vision for change, strategic planning and change management, continuous improvement and culture, and community engagement and partnerships. And then it goes around teaching and learning. You can see here, I won't read them all out. You can have a look at them. But in teaching and learning, it's really much more focused on what's going on in the classroom, as really is student and school success over here. We know that in school programs that are really, really working well, there's great professional development, there's a focus on preparing kids for the future and teachers for the teaching, social and emotional learning, and of course, accessibility is something we're very passionate about. And this one over here is more the IT one. And it's hybrid learning I'm going to spend a little time on. That's how the technology that you've got enables this sort of collaborative learning to really thrive. But then there's some other parts there too, around maybe more computer networky bit, or maybe advanced analytics when we come to think about learning programs that are enhanced by data. So these are the general big sort of areas of the education transformation framework. So the 4, the leadership and policy piece, there's a little description, and I'm going to give you all of these slides. So there's not an expectation right now that you'll take in all of these or what they are. But the idea really is that it sort of unpacks each of these 4 different areas under leadership and policy and allows you to say, have we thought about that? How are we engaging with our community? And the reason I pick on that one, for example, is because the school where I was in Frankston High School. Now, if you're from Victoria, you'll know what that means, but Frankston's a low to middle socioeconomic area who started a laptop program in 1992, and it was completely parent funded. And so one of the things that we would absolutely do in our school is we would have big parent nights where the parents got to come and ask questions and listen to the educational research behind our decisions around technology in the school. And they lapped it up. They loved it. And I've presented at some schools around use of technology, and I've done a session for staff, and then I've done a session for parents, and I think maybe I should change it for parents. But I just have found over years of experience that the parents actually love hearing about the reasons behind the academic research behind what you're doing at your school. And so engaging in the support of your community is one of the four here, which is really, really important if you're thinking about your leadership responsibilities or structures around a technology program. And there's some guiding questions here, which you could have a look at later on, but we'll do a bit of an activity for 20 or 30 minutes later to sort of have a bit of a deep dive into these. But there's these sort of ideas, who are your strategic partners, or how do you support an innovative learning culture in your school where teachers are sort of not punished for failing, but they fail fast and fail forward and move on. So there's lots of different elements. Teaching and learning are these four you can see here. We're going to talk a little bit about three of these today at least. How do we create technology platforms that are going to allow for student-centeredness or to create curriculum and assessment? And also we'll talk a little bit about the impact of devices on learning, because that's not always as simple as you might think. And then there's some guiding questions, which you can have a little bit of a look at later when you get a copy of the slides. Intelligent environments is the technology piece. And so obviously a lot of work that's being done in this space is around, this idea of Office 365 in our space, Teams as a technology in this space. How do you create this hybrid learning? And we'll talk about what the definition of hybrid learning is later on. But how do you allow the technology to enrich face-to-face classrooms with a layer of collaboration, and what does that make possible for pedagogy? But there's lots of other things we could focus on in there too. Once again, some reflection questions. Student and school success is the last one here, which is really about PD, future-ready skills for especially students, social and emotional learning, something we're very passionate about, as well as inclusion and accessibility, allowing the technology to do amazing things for all learners, regardless of where they are. And there's a whole day dedicated to that one on the right there that will be run for your support staff or teachers or whoever you've decided to send to that. And some questions. So I wanted to introduce a little bit of a research for you. You'll get a copy of all these slides, but there's also a copy of this report, which was written by Michael Fullen and others, the team from New Pedagogies for Deep Learning, who some of you may have actually worked with, because I know they've been quite active and did a lot of work in Victoria, for example. But Michael Fullen and others put together this paper as a result of what was going on globally around the pandemic. And there's a copy of this in the STP folders under research and resources. So you have a copy of this paper. It is sitting here, Education Reimagined. So you can download that at your, this folder will remain open for you to grab resources out of, but this is the paper that I'm referring to. You've got a copy of it. And if you don't get it from there, then you can have a look at the link on the left-hand side at the bottom of this screen. So what was this paper actually about? It was a response to what was going on globally at the time. And we've done very, very well. There's hyperlinks here. I've just put them on the slide. I'll show you so you can get this later. Oh, actually, what I will say too is this link down the bottom here is actually Michael Fullen talking through the elements of the paper. It's quite interesting. It goes for about 45 minutes, I think. So if you're interested in hearing him talk about it while you're driving home in the car, might be a nice way to digest it rather than having to sit and read it. Generally speaking, they speak about these three phases. What happened when schools closed down and we had to shift? We've been there, done that. How do we cope with the opening back up? We've been there and done that too, but many countries around the globe haven't. This is the most interesting one though, which is given what we did experience around remote learning, which I realize in some states was only a couple of weeks, and in some states like Victoria, where I am, it was a couple of months. But what are the learnings from that? What did we find as a result of having that experience where technology became really a central pillar for delivering learning? And some things that are really obvious to us as educators is, well-being is a critical precondition for learning. The challenge when you're doing that remotely is how on earth do we make sure the kids are okay, when I can't be with them and when I can't use my intuition or my observation skills to make sure they are okay. So then also we saw this second one here where technology shifted from being a vehicle for delivery to a mechanism for collaboration, social connectedness, and culture building. And that's really interesting because if you have a community of learners working together through technology, they can actually create social connectedness and build a really positive culture of learning, as opposed to just sort of remote learning being just a video call like we're having now, but really how do we structure more than just a video call in this space? Some students really thrived in this remote learning. And the interesting question to ask is what made some students be able to thrive when they were given more choice and voice, and what made some kids really struggle? Because I think there's a muscle around self-regulation here that we could potentially build with kids. Some kids were fine, loved it, a bit more freedom and flexibility and ran with their learning, and others sort of battled away going, I don't quite know what to do next, because they hadn't built that muscle. And so there's the other thing that we did find, this is a US statistic, but students who struggled the most, were the most vulnerable students and students who had special needs. 55% of students in one study indicated they didn't complete any set work during that time. And so that's really interesting. And one of the things that they talk about in this reimagining phase is that we've got an opportunity that has never existed before in the history of education, where suddenly the whole paradigm of learning was switched on its head and had to be delivered online, albeit for maybe a very short period of time or a long time in Australia. But there are some possibilities now of what we might do with these technology platforms to enhance our face-to-face learning experiences. And what COVID did for us is really show that there is a viable alternative model here. I'm not saying for a second that kids shouldn't be in schools, because I really do think they should be. But there is a possibility for us to use some of the technology stuff to enable even richer learning for kids and better experiences for kids, as well as build skills and other things. So what's this hybrid learning? It's one of the 16 things we have in the ETF and the Education Transformation Framework, but what is it? We define it like this. It's an approach that that combines all of the best things teachers do with kids in classrooms face-to-face. All of those well-founded strategies, great activities, engaging learning that goes on in the classroom. But it's also incorporating research or successful practices from flipped learning and blended learning and remote learning and distance learning, and putting them all together into a rich environment where you can do great face-to-face activities supported by great digital activities, because we know that there are quite amazing possibilities. The statement down the bottom is very, very true though. Old content on a new platform is still old content. Technology-rich classrooms with bad teaching and learning are just expensive, bad classrooms. So you've got to it's all about the teaching and learning strategies that you employ, whether or not it's on technology or whether it's face-to-face, and I think we know that. So this hybrid learning thing is the idea of how do we set up a technology environment in our school that is going to allow the richness of face-to-face learning be enhanced by the richness of a technology-based learning program for kids too. And hopefully we never go into lockdown again, but we still can do some amazing activities this way. So let's go big for a second. Let's talk about what's happening in the world of education and tell you a couple of stories about that. One of the things that that we have noticed is that we're in what we call the fourth industrial revolution at the moment. And so we've been through other industrial revolutions, and the fourth of which is really this blurring of the physical and digital worlds. And we see a lot of students who spend a lot of time using technology. It's such an ingrained part of their life. And of course, there are some challenges around this technology richness. For example, there's articles that talk about 47% of all jobs will be automated by 2034. And so therefore, it's more a skills-based education we need to focus on to make sure that students are prepared for jobs that will probably exist by 2034, not those that will be phased out because technology can do them better. And this is something that's kind of a bit worrying, but we've kind of been here before. This is a picture of New York. Some of you will have stood next to the Flatiron building there, you can see in the picture. But this is 1905, where there was lots and lots of horses around, really driving the economy across the entire of the US. And actually 25% of all the agriculture, or everything that was planted and grown in terms of agriculture in the US, was really to fuel the horses that drove their economy. 25% of all agriculture. And then some smarty came up with the car. And in 1925, the whole landscape changed. And with that, if you can have a look at those two pictures side by side, and with that became a complete upheaval because of the Industrial Revolution that was experienced at that time, in terms of lots of different sectors. You know, the agricultural industry suddenly lost 25% of its business, if you like. There were different jobs around all of the adjustment and the maintenance of those horses that were no longer required. People had to retrain to be mechanics, for example. And we've seen this kind of thing before. The thing we're nervous about now is, what is this AI stuff? What's this technology stuff mean for us? This is a very exciting night scope robot that roams around car parks and looks for danger. And when it sees danger, its eyes go orange and it's suspicious that something's going on. And when it's really dangerous, they go red. And, you know, so we thought we were going to have these robots protecting us, and we were promised sort of flying cars, but instead we got robots that couldn't tell there were steps in a pond at the bottom. And so we have to be kind of realistic about what this technology does, how long it'll take us to get to a point where that technology is really realized. But we also have to acknowledge the now. And so some people have described the current generation of kids that are in your schools as fidgetals. They're unable to draw a distinction between the physical world and their digital world. And they're so ingrained together. And if you don't believe that, then the next time a 15-year-old comes to you and tells you they're being bullied on social media, just ask them to shut their accounts down and see how they react, because that'll stop it. The reality is that it is part of their development of self-identity. They use technology in such a way that it does sort of build their identity of self through their online profiles, through their persona that they portray. It's a communication mechanism for them that we never had. We could ring a friend from home when I was a kid, ring my mate from school and sort of say, "Oh, how are you going?" But certainly not be as connected with them as the kids are now. One of the dangers with this that we see time and time again is highlighted in this study here. This is a global study that includes 42,000 students from 16 countries. It's called the International Computer and Information Literacy Study. And it assesses eighth grade students. So what's that, about 13-year-olds, 12-year-olds? And it looks at their ability to use technology in meaningful ways for a range of different purposes. And basically, it bursts this myth that kids are digital natives and therefore we don't need to teach them anything about technology. Time and time again, we see examples of where kids can't actually use technology effectively to do the things they need to do at school, but they're awesome at Instagram, or they're great at Googling stuff. And there's a whole different world of what they need to do. The study shows that only 2% of students were able to work independently with technology to gather and manage information, so get it from a variety of sources and put it somewhere and use it, and do so with precision and actually make some evaluative judgments about what they'd got. Only 2% of students out of 42,000 across 14 countries. And only 20% were even able to do that without evaluative judgment. So we think that kids are digital natives because they've grown up with this stuff, but really we need to think about at schools, how can we help these kids to really be able to use this technology for valid purposes that are going to be valued in their lives moving forward? And it's a bit of a challenge. And it's a challenge because of distractions. And one of the distractions that, that I think we've kind of got ourselves into is this virtual reality, augmented reality, mixed reality, AR, VR, MR. Is this BS? Have we worked this out yet? Has there been research done on this? Or are we buying headsets to let kids look at pyramids because it's cool? I'm being annoyingly facetious. There is research to suggest this is good stuff, but it's good stuff used sparingly, and it's good stuff when used properly. And so they've done studies on sort of virtual reality, for example, showing that 2 weeks later retention can actually be improved by students having experienced something in this mode of technology. We can see reduced cognitive load, which is the ability for the human brain to take on enough information and manipulate it in the brain. When understanding things via mixed reality models, it helps them to be able to understand it better because it reduces cognitive load. And so in our world, we have this thing called a HoloLens. And as a matter of fact, just at a big conference Microsoft runs in technology space, not education specific, we just released a product called HoloLens Mesh. And basically it allows multiple people in different spaces, so not even in the same room like you can see on this video, to collaborate together and stand together as though they're in the same room, and experience things over distance that we've never been able to experience before. And so here you can see holograms that are actually floating in the environment, but through this thing, unlike sort of pure virtual reality where you kind of have got a screen in front of your face and everything's fake, in mixed reality, it's like I'm seeing holograms in my environment, but I can still see the people I'm standing next to. And so this isn't science fiction. This is a story from university, which is where a professor called Sue Wish-Baratz, who's an anatomy professor, actually during COVID, they shipped out 185 of these HoloLens things to their first year anatomy students because they couldn't come on campus and they had to now learn anatomy through some other means. And this university had been partnering with Microsoft for years to develop this technology you can see here in the pictures, which is actually a colleague of ours from Sydney, standing in his kitchen area at 1 a.m. taking part in one of these lectures or classes. And you can see that he's got his hands out there and he's overlaying the holograms he can see across his own physical hands to see where things sit. The question really is, does this sort of technology work? They actually found that learning the anatomy didactics, the language of different parts of the anatomy, was improved by almost 3 hours in using a HoloLens experience versus using a physical cadaver lab. Now, I don't think there's any suggestion here that students shouldn't have an experience in a cadaver lab if they're learning medicine or they're learning physiotherapy or whatever. But I think there's some interesting ways we could overlay technology into the process of understanding stuff by using these kinds of technologies, which are amazing. And some schools are using these kinds of tech in their schools at the moment. But what I would say about these kinds of technology as an example is that this is about creating the future, not consuming it. And so when we think about using VR or AR or mixed reality, MR, with our kids in schools, we should not think about what experience are they going to have, but we should think about what can they create as an experience for others. Because that's where the jobs are, that's where the future is, that's where the real skills are, that's where the thinking is. And so we see these people here and now work for Saab. Saab, you might know as a car manufacturer back in the day, depending on how old you are. But they also used to make aircraft, like fighter jets. And they also make military systems. And these people were displaced from their automotive industry jobs in Adelaide. And now they're using mixed reality to create sort of heads-up displays for soldiers. So they've been retrained out of one type of engineering into another as a result of changes through the loss of our automotive industry in Australia. Or we can have a look at these examples here of where RMIT are sort of solving a big problem of architecture and building. When an architect thinks, they think in 3D, but the problem is they have to create two-dimensional drawings of their thoughts and ideas. And then a builder picks up the two-dimensional drawings and tries to turn it back into 3D. And there's often a disconnect. If you've ever built a house, you'll know that the builder will say, well, the architect has no idea how to actually, this was never going to work. And an architect will often say, they can build this, there's no problem here. And so using this technology in the middle to make sure that there is a three-dimensional way of being able to see where to put the next bit of wire in this little example, or the next brick in this example, is really quite interesting. This is the University of Technology Sydney building, which some of you will be very familiar with. Some of you may have even studied there. And this is a building that kind of looks like a brown paper bag, but it's made of brick. And the reality is that bricklayer productivity goes down by 90% when we're not using straight walls, especially when you're building something as complex as this. And so we're starting to see this kind of technology. Believe it or not, you can see that he's looking down there and seeing these little overlays of where the next brick should go to build walls that are irregular in shape. And so we might have thought bricklaying would be the last area to be impacted by technology, but there are huge changes happening everywhere. Nursing students using this sort of stuff. This is actually a picture this is Lawrence. He's wearing a HoloLens. He's looking at that chair where there's no one sitting. But here's what he's seeing. There's a patient sitting in that chair who starts to sweat, starts to go pale, can see the vital signs change. You know, there's changes in that patient that actors couldn't do. And so it allows sort of nursing students and medical students to understand concepts in a different way and experience things that they will face in the real world. But kids won't get a job out of experiencing this stuff. We have to get them creating. And a nice, easy way that lots of kids work in 3D is Minecraft. And so here in Minecraft land, we can see a house being built on the left-hand side there. And on the right-hand side, just through a Windows 10 computer with a camera, you can actually project that out into space and move around it because it's like a 3D object sitting on the floor of my lounge room. And so students can build stuff in 3 dimensions and then export it out and view it in mixed reality without headsets, without any fancy equipment other than just a computer that they've got. And so it's a nice stepping stone for little kids to start getting into this idea of how do we do this kind of learning. There's also resources out there everywhere. These are some free curriculum resources that we have called Hacking STEM, which are sort of the starter of some thinking around STEM-based curriculum. You know, this little helmet you can see here is an activity for kids where they build with sensors and stuff, a little helmet, and they whack a tennis ball against it and it measures through connecting it up to their Excel spreadsheets, how much force there is on the brain through trauma and so on and so forth. So it might be an activity for sort of junior secondary school kids to think about trauma or to think about anatomy or to think about lots of different things. The interesting thing about these guides and lots of this sort of curriculum is that it's the unguided activity that kids do after the step-by-step ones that matter. It just saying to the student, do this hacking STEM activity or whatever other activity and follow the steps in this guide is going to be less impactful than if you said set kids free. So I remember a story of a grade 6 class in Singapore where the teacher said, we're going to use these little microbit things like little computer chip boards that you can hook up to Bluetooth and you can hook up to sensors and movement sensors and stuff. And we're going to build a security system for our classroom. And so they spent the day using a computer, creating a computer system for their, a security system for their classroom, where they would be able to see if the door opened, it would send their teacher a text message. If a window opened, it would send their teacher a text message. Or they'd make sounds go off like alarm systems. And the amount of thinking they had to do to create that, the amount of programming they did to create their sort of safe and secure classroom was really the rich activity that was the one they did after this kind of learning step by step. I'm just going to shift gears for the last few minutes because I want to talk a little bit about how some people are thinking about technology playing a massive role in the future of education around things like learning analytics and things like helping teachers to understand how do I actually do that with some meaning in some meaningful way? Because I maybe I wasn't the best teacher in the world, but I had, you know, sometimes in my secondary teaching career for 10 or 12 years, I taught 125 kids a day. And to personalize learning for 125 kids a day, I'm not sure that's possible. Even once a week to have 125 kids working on their own stuff is pretty hard work. And so there might be ways that we can use technology though, and we're starting to see system-wide approaches to this, where they might be starting to use technology and something called advanced analytics to get to this point. Everyone's got a roll book with descriptive analytics in it. That kid got 7, that kid got 8, that kid got 10, that kid got 2. That's descriptive analytics. That's what happened. And then we move up here and we see why did it happen is what we call diagnostic analytics. The really interesting stuff is when we get to this top level here, which is what there's a lot of work going on to in education globally at system levels. And that is, what can the data tell us about what happened, why it happened, and what will happen? Can we predict at a point in a kid's school life what they've missed? And then could we get to a system where to a place where that system could say, and here's what you should do to perform better. Here you go, Trav, the teacher. Here's the 3 things that Jack needs to really progress. So focus on these 3 things. And so we're seeing a lot of this data stuff be used. And I know that there are a lot of smart systems in schools that are starting to dip into this. But when we think about data, it's like, well, who's smarter? Well, they both got the same IQ, these 2 people. but it depends the way you look at it, right? Because there's different intelligences. Or if we might think about pastoral care, who's at more risk? Is it student A or student B? Well, it kind of depends the way you look at it. The challenge is for a classroom teacher, you don't have one kid, you might have 25. If you're in a primary school, you've got a chance to get, to understand that data with your 25 students if you're a class or a grade teacher. In a secondary context, then you might teach something like 120 kids, and that becomes harder because now you've got this much data to crunch. Or if you're a school leader like many of you guys are, you might have this much data to crunch. And so it's really challenging to work out and to recognize patterns that are seen across all of this learning data. And so a lot of work in technology space in education at systemic level, which will eventually turn into products that we will use in our schools, is focused around this data bit. And I just want to finish with a story of this guy. This guy's an amazing educator. He's a teacher at University of New South Wales. His name is Dr. David Kellerman. And it's a story that sort of leads us into thinking about the technology platform that he used, but really it's kind of like mind-boggling in terms of personalizing learning for students. And we're sort of thinking about how this might now be applicable in our schools moving forward. So sorry, it's not a K-12 example, it's a uni example. But this is one of his classes in the middle here, 500 students in his first year engineering course. He was a pretty innovative lecturer anyway. He used OneNote, which we might talk about later on, to actually draw his engineering diagrams, and he would do that live on the big sort of screen at the front of the room. All the students had a copy of this, so it would be his ink that he was drawing in his computer would appear to all the students' phones or computers themselves. Pretty innovative. He used to live produce his lectures onto YouTube, and he would have a doctoral student sitting in the front of the room, and as someone asked a question, he could answer it to the camera because the doctoral student would have told him about it. So pretty cool stuff. In 2017, he rolled out this thing called Teams, which I'm sure some of your schools are using, and sort of brought all of this stuff together. So what he did was his OneNote would now be brought into here, and he moved off YouTube and moved into something called Stream, which is part of Office 365. Some of you won't have it available through your departments of education, but it's kind of like a private YouTube within your Office 365 environment. All of their collaborative documents went in there. They even used a Moodle learning management system that was pinned across the top. Even high-end engineering software was pinned across. And he created this sort of single pane of glass. When you're studying first year engineering, you go to this window and you open it up, and my notes are there, my videos are there, my documents are there, my learning management system's there, everything's there. And as a result of doing this, he created 900% increase in collaboration, which you might think, well, that's wonderful. What he was really doing was getting all of the data about learner behavior underneath this. He also had a challenge that he had a new problem. And the new problem was he was missing questions that students were asking. And so they were so actively engaged in posting and asking questions and asking for help and answering each other's questions that they were sort of missing it. And this is where the technology got a bit cool, because what they did was they created a bot, a little bit of technology that sat in their teams. And it was called the question bot. And when a student had a question, they would say, I have an put @ symbol question about da 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 da. And as soon as the student wrote @ before the question, this bot would start listening and it would start understanding what the question was. And then it would automatically flag the tutor because it knew who the student was. And it would say to the tutor, which might be me, hey, Trav, one of your students has asked a question. What it also was doing, and then the tutor would come in and have a look at the previous responses to that question. Did they, has one of the other students answered it correctly? Or do I need to answer it correctly? And then they would flag to that bit of technology that this question is answered correctly. And so what the bot was able to do then was understand and had in 2 weeks 200 topic categorized question and answer pairs about first year engineering. And so then they were able to allow the bot to start helping students without teacher intervention. Where do I find the answers to my questions? Because remember, there's 500 in this class. And so it would say, go to this article here, or this has been answered before. Here's a link to the chat. And it would even go to a point where the recorded lectures the bot would say to a student, I can see you've asked a question about Newton's first law or second law. Go to lecture 2, minute 8 is where you'll find the answer. And they would start to get more help than they would otherwise get because of the scale of their classes. Now, the last bit is that, I mean, that's pretty cool, but the last bit is quite amazing about the performance improvements in his students through this next bit. What they did using some pretty cool technology, which we don't need to worry about, was they taught the computer system to understand the engineering curriculum at, different levels of ability. So to understand what all the engineering learning was that they had to do, and understand what a sort of pretty dodgy understanding of it was, what a slightly better than dodgy, what a normal understanding was, what a brilliant understanding of that content was. And they basically used an algorithm to use some data and predict performance with kids. So they got the previous year's performance data because they knew what the students have been doing in the system, and they knew the end exam results. And they trained the computer to look at the current set of data from the students and make predictions about their exam results. And they were able to predict exam performance with a 90% plus accuracy through the data that the system was gathering. And so what he was able to then do was enable the system to create personalized study packs for every student, question by question, 2 weeks before the exam. 500 individual study packs were released to the students 2 weeks before the exams. And they would look very different depending on who you were in the school, in whichever student you were. And so that's really a really interesting example of the possibility of technology helping students 65% pass rate up to 85% pass rate in that course as a result of the technology. So it's a big story. He's an amazing educator. The idea here, the reason I'm sort of showing you that, is that the possibility of technology in the future to help teachers to get more time back and to make better interventions for kids is a reality. And it's about now grabbing that kind of thinking from someone like David Kellerman and building it into stuff. And that's something that we're doing in our approach to hybrid learning. And so, as I said before, hybrid learning is an approach to the best face-to-face learning you've ever seen, and it's happening in your classrooms right now, and incorporating technology platforms like what Kellerman was using or what we've got in Office 365 to enhance that learning and take it to a new level. And one of the things I mean by that is, you will know about the John Hattie research, the meta-analysis of meta-analyses, love it or hate it. But one of the things they found in that study, for example, was that homework had a fairly low effect size on changing performance in kids. And I wonder whether it's homework per se or whether it's the type of homework I use to set my kids. Because while we might be doing a group activity together in class and they're working on creating their new version of a script or whatever, homework looked very different to that because we didn't have that technology to enable that collaborative continuation of face-to-face learning. And so now we do have that. And so in the hybrid learning environment, many of the activities that would be face-to-face could be continued as homework in groups, in collaboration between the students, keep working on their stuff. And that changes the sort of way that we think about homework. If we think about what we're trying to do in technology, schools have very different views to what students want out of technology to what teachers want out of technology. And so I'm about to go down into the weeds a little bit and talk about how we see, because many school leaders say to us, if you were setting up a school, what would you do? How would you do it, given what you know about technology? And so we know that your school's on a journey. We know that your school's going to be or is currently using Microsoft technology. Here's the way we think about it. And so for the next 22 minutes, I'm going to sort of go down into classroom land and show you some ideas about how the way we use our technology to enable that hybrid learning layer of the technology behind great teaching and learning face-to-face. And so then we'll be having a break in 22 minutes where you'll get some time to think, time to reflect. When we come back, there'll be one more bit of input and then time for us to do some strategic planning moving forward. So when we think about technology in the classroom, schools have to care about this stuff. How does it all integrate together? How am I going to get my teachers skilled up? Is it private? Is it safe for my kids? Does it fit within our budget, et cetera, et cetera? Students just want to be able to get their stuff from everywhere. They expect now, because of that phygital nature of them, to be able to get their stuff across whatever device they're using from wherever they are. And they want to be able to get stuff done with their mates at school, their friends at school, and be able to work together on things. Teachers, they want their students to use this technology for inspirational stuff. They also want to save themselves some time and their students some time. They want to be able to use a variety of teaching strategies, and they want to do less teching and more teaching. You know, I want this stuff to work. And so the platform across the bottom of that in our world is this Office 365 platform. And so if you're not into technology, this next slide will be boring as hell for you. But it's the underpinning set of technology that is this platform we talk about in Microsoft. And it's called Office 365, and it's what your teachers will delve into and think about the pedagogy associated with these sorts of tools. And it's what your IT team will learn about in terms of the maintenance and management of this stuff. But we don't really have to care as school leaders about the nuts and bolts of what all these things are. I will tell you this though, and I tell you this to make you look like a hero to your parent community. With your use of Microsoft Office 365, every student and every teacher in your school gets 5 free copies of Office. So here's a scenario. Some of you mentioned BYOD programs. If you sort of set some specifications for a computer and the kids go down to Harvey Norman and buy their computer, the salesperson might upsell them with a little Office 365 card for 150 bucks that gives them Office. No parent needs to buy that in Australia, because pretty much, I think it's like 98% of all students in the country get 5 free copies of Office through us. So none of your students should be going out and paying more money for Office at Harvey Norman or JB Hi-Fi or Computer Shop. And the way that they get it, and all the teachers are the same. When you get 5 licenses, it means, like, let's say, you know, little Johnny's mum and dad are separated. Little Johnny's got a copy of it logged in on his iPad or his Surface computer or whatever. He's got a copy on a computer at home. He's got a copy at mum's place, and he's got a copy at dad's place logged into their computers. There's 4 copies, right? So they can have up to 5 logins on different machines and install the stuff. And it's really important that we tell you that, because not many people know about that, and parents are really wasting money out there going and buying Office some other way. So when we think about this technology platform with all its tools of, you know, PowerPoint and all that stuff, it's all in the cloud, which makes it all collaborative. But this is the way we think about it now. Teams is a tool that we're going to talk about for the next 15 minutes, which allows you to bring this hybrid learning thing to life and can allow you to do streamlined communications in your school between leaders like yourselves, between you and your teachers, so no kids yet, and also between students and their teachers. And so we think about this through these 3 scenarios. This Teams thing, which I'll show you in a sec, can enable great staff collaboration, professional learning communities, leadership teams, faculty groups. And there's different ways you'd set that up in a primary school versus a secondary school. And in the teacher days, you'll go into that bit. And I'm going to share you some templates in a second that can help you plan for that. Of course, there's a time when you could start to use these Teams environments for a teacher, maybe a teacher's aide or someone, and the 25 kids in the classroom. And that's called a class team. And I'll show you this in a second. And there's also ways that you could use this Teams thing to help communication with the community. For example, obviously, as an assistant principal of a school, we're on the school council, and some of our school councillors traveled a lot for work. They couldn't be at our school council meetings. And so now they could be either part of a Teams call like we're having right now, or they could be part of our team and enable them to see the documents, add to the discussion, regardless of whether they were in a hotel somewhere in a different state or whatever it is. So there's a lot to take in here, but I'm going to show you an example of what this looks like. This is a classroom example, right, where a teacher said, our hybrid learning, our digital platform in a classroom is going to be Teams. It allows you to do all of this stuff. Kids can collaborate on files together, which means that suddenly, right, you guys up the back table there, you're going to be a group and you're going to collaborate together to make a 4-slide PowerPoint which explains the concept of da-da-da. And then that table up the other side are doing a different activity, and that table up the other side are doing different activity. If those PowerPoints are created within their team, their class team, then they are by nature collaborative. And so it gets rid of all of that challenge of sitting all around one computer. They can really do that easily, and it can continue at school and at home. You can add other learning tools in. So if you use, someone mentioned Seesaw, but there are lots of different apps and applications that your teachers use. You can embed them into your team. And I'll show you what that means in a sec. It allows you to do assignments. It's got basically an LMS, a learning management system built in. So you can track their progress, and you can post assignments, and they can hand stuff in. That's in there as well if you want to use it. You can gather responses. You could host virtual meetings or classes. Hopefully we don't have to go back to remote learning, but it's a great way also to bring experts into the classroom from outside. And so students can chat with their peers. You can have discussions about stuff. You can post prompts like a discussion forum and allow them to contribute. So with that, I'm going to show you rather than show you anything on slides. Here's an example. This is a teacher login, and it's just in my demo environment, so half is not built out properly, whatever, but let's imagine that this is Mary's login to Teams. So Teams has these icons down the side. It's got her actual teams that she's a part of. Now she's a part of the Fred Bloggs College staff, so she's part of this big team here. No students in there, just the teachers from the school. But she also teaches, and sorry, this is a secondary example if you're primary, but I'll talk about some of the differences you might see in primary in a sec. She's a teacher of 7G science, so she's got a team for her and her 25 kids. She teaches 9F maths. She's got a team for her and her 25 kids. But she's also, of course, a member of the science faculty and the mathematics faculty. So let me just take you inside a class team and show you what this looks like. It really can be a one-stop shop for collaborative learning between her and her 25 students. And it can include, obviously there's posts here where we could be chatting and discussing. It's all labeled by the kid's name, whatever their login is, so there's no danger of not being able to say who added what. All of that is good. The tabs down the side here, this teacher's got brain structure, exploring space, and human body, and they're the 3 topics they teach in science. So she's got a brain structure tab, and now everything in here is about brain structure. And there's an exploring space tab and a human body tab. Across the top though, there's a OneNote class notebook, which is like the pen and paper if you use OneNote. I'll talk about that after lunch. But the writing space for kids if they've got styluses on their computers. You can see there's the assignments, and I'll just show you what assignments look like. If you don't have a learning management system in your school, then this is a great little learning management system. If you do have a learning management system in your school, you can disable this feature because you don't want teachers having to do 2 things, right? You don't want to be confusing. But let's say we don't have one and I'm like, yeah, I might use Teams to create some assignments to send out to my Year 7 science kids. So hand in your project on space. So this might be the task that it is, and then a bit of a description of it. And I could add a rubric in. If you use rubrics at your school, you can build a rubric from scratch. So here you can add more and more, and you can get the idea. You can build rubrics and share them across your staff. And then I'm basically just going to assign that to the kids. And so now the students have this new task that appears. They all get a notification. You'll see it in the bottom right of my screen in a second, where all of the kids get flagged. Oh yes, I've got a hand, there's the little notification. I've got to hand in my assignment and it's due whenever I set the due date. And it allows the students to hand stuff in, me do some marking, give them some feedback, and the back and forth associated with handing in digital files. It's like a little learning management system built into the team if you want to use it. But the most powerful thing for teachers is this little plus at the end. And it allows for me to add in the other stuff I use for teaching. So I might use Pear Deck at my primary school, where Pear Deck is basically a way of creating sort of interactive quizzes and stuff during presentations, and like that Poll Ev thing we did before, Pear Deck's kind of an education-y version of that, but it's really quite cool. So I might add a Pear Deck thing in, or I might put a website in, or I might put any of these other things that I've got down the bottom here in, and they sit across the top. The idea of this is that it becomes the one pane of glass for our collaborative documents, our curriculum files, where they go to hand stuff in, where they go to get assignments, and all of the other active stuff that we're doing in our classrooms. If I go back out, I'm just going to jump into the science faculty one. So Mary, this teacher, is also a member of the science faculty. You can see down the side here that she's only showing the Year 7 science and Year 10 science parts. But there's all of these other areas of science too, but she doesn't teach Year 8, 9, 11 physics, whatever. She doesn't teach these. So while they're sitting there in this team and they're being curated by people and there's comments and sharing files and whatever, she doesn't care. She only teaches Year 7 and 10. So these are the two that she cares about. And so part of the job here is to think about how would we structure this environment if we were going to use this for our school to streamline teacher communication, to do great teaching and learning in hybrid learning classrooms, or to communicate with our community. If you are a primary school, you probably don't need a different team for the Year 1 team and a different team for the Year 2 team, because you could probably do it in the master team. Because primary schools usually are a bit smaller, and so I could just go, oh, I want our Year 1 team to have their own channel. Year 1 team. Who's going to be in it? I'm going to add the 5 Year 1 teachers or the 3 Year 1 teachers, and now they've got their own channel within the school one, because they might just need to do some conversations, have their shared documents there and take some notes as the Year 1 team. But when you get into a secondary school, it gets a bit bigger when you've got 40 teachers teaching science and you've got 50 teachers teaching maths and so on and so forth. So horses for courses. But that's the reason why we have these planning templates. So in the folder of resources that hopefully you've been able to get access to so far, we don't have to look at these right now, but there's something for if you're thinking about how do I best structure our team's environment or whatever, in your folder of resources, there is a Teams planning template document. So here is a template in Word, and here are a couple of examples. So they're in the aka.ms/STP leaders folder. If you still can't get it, tell us in the chat that you can't get it, and we'll try and help you make sure you've got these resources. But in there is a planning template under Teams planning templates, and here's what it looks like. This is basically, this is an English faculty team, right? So you can see up here it says English faculty, and you sort of work down the page in here. It's like, right, we need to create an English faculty team, a maths faculty team, a geography history, if it's in a secondary context. And we've got a primary school example for you too in there. Who is going to be the owner of this team? Heads of department, head of curriculum. Who are going to be members? Any teacher who teaches English. And then it's about how am I going to structure our channels? And the channels are the blue ones. And then what subfolders, the black ones, might we need to structure a faculty team for English? And so this is a great way to do it on paper before you start clicking around on a computer. What's the team name? Also think about naming conventions and stuff. So this is the sort of stuff that your teachers and your IT people will do a bit more of a deep dive on this kind of stuff in their own sessions. But I just wanted to show you that there's a template there and there's some working samples of, for example, a principal team or a staff team or some head teacher teams. There's different examples here of what this could look like. So that's not really a job that we're going to do today, but if you are thinking about using Teams as a vehicle for doing this hybrid learning thing and to transform the way your school communicates, then they're great resources. I just wanted to finish before we have a break in 5 minutes with a couple of classroom examples of stuff. I should show you this though. This is a really easy guide. It's a PDF that you can download if you're new to Teams or your staff are, and we'll share all this with the teachers, of course. There's a great little Teams guide that just sort of breaks out what's this bit for and what's that bit for and what's that button do. But we're not going to focus on that a lot today. Another thing that it does, and I spoke about with the David Kellerman story about analytics, we're starting to build in some basic analytics into a program like Teams. And that is just to give teachers some insights about what's actually going on with their learners. And so this was created pretty quickly during remote learning, and I'm sure it's being used hugely around the world while there's still remote learning going on. But you can see that this student here, Juanita, she was active in this environment at that period of time throughout the day. And here's what she was actually working on. And so that's just surfacing up some data out of the back of the Teams and Office 365 thing and saying to the teacher, at that time in the day, Juanita was working on these kinds of things. Now, that might just be interesting, but Jacob here hasn't been active at all. And so that's even more interesting for me. Up here, it talks about how many people have been active and what are the average grades going on in my classes and how many conversations are going on, and it's an indication of engagement. And then this is the future of what that's going to look like very soon, is that it will give a dashboard to every teacher in their hybrid learning class via Teams, some insights that they may not have otherwise known. Have a look at this one down here. Ella Taylor, one of the students, hasn't started the comedy of errors yet. Now the system would know that that might be due on Friday. And it also knows that she hasn't clicked on the assignment or any of the documents associated with that task. Now, I wouldn't know that as a teacher because I'm assuming that Ella's doing the right thing and she's got onto this and she's been working on it for the last week or whatever. This is a way of the system going, hey, did you know that this student hasn't opened this yet? And it allows you to then message the student here and send them a little, hit them up in Teams and basically say, hey, Ella, I can see you haven't started this yet. So it's surfacing up these sort of actionable insights to us. Let me finish off by showing you just a couple of classroom examples. This is a Year 9 mathematics group, and they use this through remote learning in Victoria, but you can see what's happening here in the way that this teacher has structured her lessons for her kids. There's obviously posts, which is what you can see now, where she's reminding the kids of what they need to do or where they should be up to, and kids are liking stuff and whatever. There's files and classes and all of this stuff across the top here, where the students are sort of navigating their mathematics learning through this. But she's also done some pretty cool stuff by recording the live lessons that she was delivering. These might now be not recordings of live lessons, because hopefully we're all back together in the classroom and we do teaching live, but they might be flipped lessons. Remember we talked about hybrid learning being the best of flipped learning as well? Flipped learning is the idea of providing 10-minute little chunks of content for kids as starters that they watch outside of class time for homework, and then we spend more time in the class unpacking ideas around it. And so this would give us a great place to store those flipped learning examples. And here's what it looks like when a teacher was teaching in this classroom. Writing on their screen with a stylus, teaching mathematics to Year 9s. There she is sitting in the bottom. All her kids were on the Teams call at the time. But of course, a lot of this would be happening face-to-face now. One last thing I wanted to show you. See this little channel here? This is actually in a Year 12 class. There's a little channel there that has been blacked out or blued out. And the reason that has been blued out is because that's a kid's name. This student suffers from severe anxiety to the point where they won't answer any questions in classrooms. They won't engage in any sort of things that are public. So that is a private channel between a teacher and one student, where that student can feel comfortable to ask questions of their teacher that they wouldn't otherwise feel comfortable doing. And so right across the top here and down into here is the way she managed her classroom. Here's all our posts, here's our shared files, here's our class OneNotes, here's the assignments you've got due, here's our weekly planner for what we had to achieve in that week, here's our live lessons, here's our trigonometry videos, all organised. And when we think about it in terms of psychology, and we're going to do a little bit of work on this after the break, There's something called cognitive load, and it's a real challenge when students start using technology for learning. Cognitive load has two different types. There's Germanic cognitive load, which is the amount of brain power they're putting into learning maths or learning their literacy or doing their reading. And there's extraneous cognitive load, the amount of brain power that goes to driving technology or to making the spreadsheet or to finding the right link to go to. All of these other extraneous things take brain power away from learning. And so what we find with a Teams interface is that it allows everything to come to one spot, and you can embed all your stuff in there so that it's a one-stop shop for that collaborative learning experience. So what we are going to do now is we are going to have a break. I am right on time. And maybe Amanda or Troy, because I haven't been looking at the chat, if there's any pressing questions right now that that I could take.
No, I think we've pretty much answered them, Travis, unless you want to invite people off mute. But yeah, we pretty much answered them.
You legends. Thank you.
All under control. Yep.
Good on you. So if there's anything else that you want to ask a question with about, then feel free to do so. Remember that there are these templates here to start thinking about all this stuff. So we're going to stop for morning tea, breakfast, or lunch, whatever time frame you're in, for half an hour. I started pretty big, talked about the ETF framework, talked about some global stuff, talked about the amazing work that Dr. Kellerman's doing, how that's sort of coming into some of the things like insights in teams. And then I went right back down into classroom world, which may not be your world as a leadership team, but I need to make sure that you've got a bit of an understanding of what's possible with this tech. So when we have our afternoon session on planning for that, what do I need to think about? How do we need to, what work do we need to do? Who do I need to engage to do stuff? You've got some sense of it. So in 29 minutes, we are going to come back and I'm going to do hopefully about 20 more minutes of inputs. And then we're going to spend an hour or so where you're going to get your other sticky notes out and you're going to start creating an action plan for the last hour about what you might do as a result of this learning. So with that, you can stay on the call by all means. We're just going to have a break, but you can just turn your camera off, turn your microphone off, and just leave yourself on the call there. And